Welcome to episode 5 of Media Conversations with Malik Cooper. I'm your host, Malik Cooper, joined today by award-winning broadcast journalism student at the University of South Carolina, Finn Carlin. Finn, welcome and thanks for being here today.
Wow, that was an awesome intro. Thanks for having me. This is awesome. I'm excited.
No problem. You can find Finn on Instagram at Finn Carlin and on Twitter at Finn_Carlin for content by him and the Student Gamecock Television News team. First, I want to take our listeners back to 2020. As you all know, that was a very politically charged year, not only because of police brutality reigniting the Black Lives Matter movement, but also because of the looming 2020 presidential election. On August 21st of that year, a man appeared on USC's campus holding a sign that read, "BLM," referring to the Black Lives Matter organization, "are racist thugs." Naturally, this was a controversial event on campus, and as a member of SGTV News that I mentioned a minute ago, you had to cover this story. So what was that like?
Yeah, that was a really, really bizarre week because there were two protests that happened that week, and it was the first week of classes. I had just, moved in a week ago, and I was an RM, a resident mentor, in the dorm that I was living in last year. So I was, helping all these freshmen kind of get used to their moving in process and helping get set up for class. And then, boom, we have a protest. And everybody else, on our news team at the moment was in class, and I kind of ducked out of class early because I just heard a bunch of shouting outside. I looked out. I asked people what was going on, and they said some guy is protesting BLM at the end of Green Street. So I immediately grabbed my camera and my tripod. I ran out there, and then I see just a swath of students around this dude, and he's got a loudspeaker or a what's the bullhorn. He's got a bullhorn with him, and he's shouting. He's clearly trying to rile up the students, and it's obviously working. And being out there in that environment, it was the first real protest that I had covered. And it was hardly, a protest so much as students were protesting this person, not students protesting themselves. This guy was protesting BLM, and students were responding to him, and they were kind of trying to drown him out as he was trying to drown them out with, his own messages and his own sound. And I got to talk to people that had showed up on the scene, some students that were there. The student body vice president came out. I talked to her, as well as the student body president. They both came out. They were trying to kind of dissipate the crowd a little bit, get people to ignore this guy and just keep moving. But ultimately, this kind of thing doesn't happen on USC's campus very much. So students seeing other students, and then they see what he's saying, and they rush over to join their students. And I was able to get shots of the crowd, chanting, Black Lives Matter. And I was able to get, shots of him saying quite the contrary. And I, put my camera in his face and I said, "You've clearly gotten a response from students here. What is your goal? Why are you doing this?" And I think he said something along the lines of, "I came out here to melt snowflakes." And I was like, "Well, do you think that that's something that you've accomplished?" And then he was like, "Yeah, there's many snowflakes that have melted out here today." And being in the midst of that is definitely something that I'm not going to forget, especially as a student. Most of the time, I feel like you would think about local news covering that kind of a protest, or even a national news organization covering that kind of a protest. And I think it did get a little bit of national attention. I'm not entirely sure. But being in the middle of that as a student and thinking about how to navigate that situation and cover it, because we also had to turn it that day, because the news wouldn't have been as timely if I had put it out tomorrow. So it was my first, real breaking news situation covering a protest. And that was, a really big learning moment, but also something that I'm not going to forget, because I saw all of these students that were rallied around each other, regardless, of who they were. They came and started supporting each other, which I thought was super inspiring. And I thought that was really cool to see. And I definitely don't think that I will ever forget that. Even when I'm long into my professional career, I doubt that that's something I'm going to forget.
You did a good job of making it clear to our audience the tension that this man caused on USC's campus, and that being such a controversial topic, was it hard for you trying to cover the situation to remain objective and just cover the story from a journalistic standpoint?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it would be hard for everybody. I think a lot of times when people think of news and journalism, they think, well, they need to be unbiased and they need to be central in their coverage, which, you should try to be as objective as possible, but being purely unbiased is impossible because we're not robots. We are people with feelings, and we're people with opinions. We care about things. We feel certain ways about things and differently about other things. So, it's impossible to be perfect, and being perfect would be being unbiased and being completely objective. So pure objectivity in journalism and anything really is completely impossible, because no matter who you are, you're a human being and you feel certain ways about certain things. And, when I was out there, obviously emotions were high. There were other reporters that were out there, one of them with the Daily Gamecock, and I, was beside her as I was looking through some of my footage, and she was just crying. Just seeing all of that out there, it's really hard to watch somebody that is spreading this hate speech to these students. And the students are really riled up about it. And she was crying, and I, stopped by and asked if she was doing okay. And she said yes, but it was obviously, very, very difficult to be out there in that environment and cover that event. It's something that is easy to make somebody distraught. And like I said, it was my first time covering that kind of an event. So, just saying that these students were out there and they were, riled up over this person that was protesting BLM, obviously, as someone who is empathetic with other students, it's hard to not want to take their side. It's hard to not want to say, this person was spreading hate speech and that's wrong, even though that might be how I feel about it, but I can't do that. So I had to have a lot of direction from my news director at the time about how to properly cover that. And ultimately, I feel like I was able to cover it without saying how I felt about it. But it was really difficult to not, think about the hearts and minds of the students and really lean towards that more so than this guy that was spreading hateful messages. I mean, I don't think anybody would be on that person's side. So in that case, how would you cover something like that? It's never easy. I think that that's something that, not only I struggle with, but everybody struggles with. I mean, it's not nearly comparable, but I think about the January 6th riot and like the reporters that were there and had to cover that. And I mean, these people were storming the Capitol. They were, breaking and entering. They were hurting people. Some people died. It's difficult to not feel strongly against something like that. And I guess that depends on how you lean politically. But even just taking politics out of it, people invading a building and people dying in that process, and those people that did break in seemingly not caring because they wanted to do what they set out to do. It's hard not to be against that. So the same kind of principle applies where you want to feel for your students and you would love to communicate that, but you can't so much because you're in a position where you need to just say, this is what happened. This is why you should care about it. So I think that's ultimately the direction that I had to go with it. Just tell people what happened and why it would matter to them as students, because these are your other students that were out here and they were protesting against this person, and try to make it relate to them. But yeah, I think that's kind of thing is difficult for anybody to cover. And if somebody tells you that it wasn't or something like that isn't, I think they're lying.
That entire year, like we talked about, was encapsulated by protests and the Black Lives Matter movement because of all the police brutality too many names to even go through. So was that the only instance of, I'm gonna have a tough time covering this, or was that entire year or stretch of a couple months just filled with controversial news that you just had to get through?
Yeah. No, you pretty much outlined it perfectly. It was entirely filled with a lot of breaking news and a lot of controversy, because that year was characterized by both COVID, as well as racial tensions in the United States and the election. So a perfect trifecta of controversy and a lot of really polarizing information for people to digest. So there was that first protest, and then a few days later, a group of people were on Davis Field, which is really close to Green Street, where that person was originally. And they were, protesting BLM. They were protesting the LGBTQ plus community, people of color, and abortions, and all kinds of things. And that was a far more seemingly charged activity, because even though that person was, with his bullhorn and he was yelling, it wasn't, apparent that he was going to try to hurt anybody. And he didn't, try to make a jab at anybody. But this group of people, they were running around in circles on Davis Field, and your students were running up to them and trying to antagonize them. They were doing the same thing back. And I threw myself in the middle of it with my camera, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to get, pushed around or anything. Because some of them were like running up to my camera and they were trying to get in my face. And I was just kind of like backing up and just trying to document it, not saying anything. And that was also a very emotionally charged thing. I spoke to some students there, and, they were, talking about how they need to stand up for themselves against these people that were bullies to them. And that was only one thing the same week. And not even a week later, we got a message from the university saying that, Carlin, well, he was the president at the time of the university. He's not anymore, but that he wasn't afraid to pull the plug on staying on campus, that students might get sent home. And all of these freshmen that had just gotten on campus might get sent home. And I might have got sent home too, because I was living on campus. So that was really terrifying. And, that was COVID coverage that factored into all of that. And during that time, there were COVID testing inconsistencies with the university, and the university wasn't being clear to us, and they weren't giving us all the information. They were kind of hassling us a little bit. I went out to a COVID testing site outside. When you're outside, you've given up that right to privacy. I was, trying to be courteous, obviously, and like shoot the backs of students' heads as they were getting tested. But somebody ran up to me that was working the event, working at the testing site, and said, "Hey, you're not allowed to be here. You can't be doing this. You have to go through the media spokesperson for the university." And I was like, "Well, no, actually I don't. I have freedom of the press on my side. This isn't like a HIPAA situation. I can be outside and covering the," and so that was a whole situation. And that COVID coverage kind of continued because USC, a lot of people, kind of know it as a party school. And that is true a little bit, mainly because we have a district in our downtown, 5 Points, and has a bunch of bars there. Some of them have since closed, but last year, they were still open. And so people were flooding the bars. And for us, that's, that could be a super spreader event. And there were people without masks on, and they weren't socially distancing. And so that's something that we had to report on, as well as, a little bit after that, we had the election. So we were getting local reactions, and there were a few protests at the State House on the day that Joe Biden was announced to have won the presidency. And that was something that I had to cover. And then around, the time of January 6th, we were hearing rumors that there might be a storming of the State House and a violent protest at the State House. And we had to talk to some professors at the university about how to stay safe covering that. Fortunately, it didn't happen, but me and a few other people, we were fully ready to put ourselves at risk to be covering a potentially violent protest. And that was something that was really scary. And that second semester, there was just, again, continuous COVID coverage. And also, around that time, students were rallying together, protesting the names of buildings on our campus that are named after historical figures with racially charged backgrounds, like Strom Thurmond, for example. That's probably one of the biggest ones. So we had to do a deep investigative thing on like, okay, which buildings are named after people with like racially charged backgrounds? What have they done? Why has nothing been done? Because this is something that students have been talking about for a while. Is the university planning on doing anything? Lo and behold, nothing has happened, but all of that combined made for a very taxing and very stressful year journalistically, but all of those were learning moments, and all of that I'm not going to forget, because I got to be right where everybody was, right where the students were, covering what they cared about, especially in a time where there was so much controversy going on. So thankfully it's cooled down a little bit, but there's still those same stories that can be told.
Did the rest of the staff of SGTV have a different air about them as you all covered all these controversial topics, COVID, the election, these protests, or was it just the sober feeling of duty of it's our job to cover the news?
It's a bit of both. There were definitely some people alongside me that really wanted to keep covering events, covering protests, covering what was going on because they wanted to get experience and because they cared about, telling these stories. Some people took that time to take a step back from the organization because it was a bit too much all at once. And in that organization in particular, some people are just there to have some fun. Not everybody is there to go and cover a protest or cover rising COVID cases or anything. Some people are just there because they want to make their own show. They want to be on one of our newscasts or like an entertainment program or something. So I think in that moment, we really kind of found out who the people were that really wanted to not only build themselves up in their experience, but also go out and tell the stories of the current moment of what was going on right now. I'm glad to have been one of those people, but it was definitely really challenging. So I don't blame anybody for not wanting to cover anything during that time because so much was going on. And it was a very taxing time, mentally speaking, took a toll on me, took a toll on a lot of people, because we were balancing classes and this coverage. So we were having to find out how to have a life, if we could, in the midst of turning stories every single week. And even though reporters professionally, they turn packages and stories every single day, as a student who's also balancing, like a 30 to 40 hour school week, that's a lot. That's a lot to handle. So I definitely don't blame anybody that didn't. But for us that did, a lot of growth because it was a lot of learning, and not a lot of students, go out and do this kind of thing when they're sophomores, when they're juniors, or even freshmen. We had some people reporting when they were freshmen during that time. So I am glad that I were among the people that did go out and do this reporting. I'm not, distasteful towards those that didn't because it was very difficult. And, you don't have to go out and do all that kind of reporting to get better. That's not like a requirement. Oftentimes I wish that I could go back and not have done as much have done as many stories, because I know how difficult it was for me personally. And I wish I could have taken a step back a little bit and tried to still enjoy, my sophomore year. because you don't have to kill yourself in college in order to do well professionally. There's still plenty of opportunities to grow in a way that you can take care of yourself and find ways to get experience. So there was definitely a weird feeling during that time, but I think it really kind of solidified who were the reporters that were going out and getting this coverage, and who were the people that were kind of taking a step back from it, you know?
Yeah. On a lighter note, what responsibilities did you gain over time as a broadcast journalism major at USC? And can you sort of detail the experience of a broadcast major at USC for our audience?
Yeah. So I think that at USC, the journalism school is kind of built around getting experience. The problem is they're not super transparent about it. So you do introductory courses your first 2 years. And those are just intro level. You know, you have your intro, you know, how does media operate in society, an intro to writing, principles of journalism course, and a law and ethics course. But ultimately, I kind of wish that those had all been combined into one, because the fact that you don't really touch a camera until you step into upper division courses your junior year, I personally think is kind of criminal, because I started doing media work, videography, you know, broadcast journalism work when I was a sophomore in high school. And now I'm a junior and I still feel like I have so much to learn. I still have so much I, you know, need to do to keep growing. But if you don't touch a camera or find out how to ask proper questions, do research on stories, know who to talk to, when, what kinds of stories to tell and how to structure them until you're a junior, then that's not a lot of time between being a junior and being into your first job. And, you know, ultimately, your first job will really help teach you those kinds of things. But the more experience you can get before then, the more marketable you're going to be to different stations and different places that you're planning on hiring. So the fact that we have a media group on campus is really awesome, but it's definitely not marketed enough within the J school. Like, there's nobody, unless there's students coming to just talk to your class, there's nobody saying, hey, go join SGTV. That's where you are going to get the skills needed before you get into these upper division classes, or that's where you can get some really great experience to build yourself up before you start, you know, taking this to the next level with your coursework and also with your career readiness, building up a reel and everything. And I definitely attribute virtually every opportunity I've had since I was a freshman to SGTV, because if I didn't join, then I wouldn't have interned at Seacrest. I wouldn't have been able to tell all those stories. I wouldn't be working at a television station right now as a junior. And the same things have happened for other people that have, you know, come through SGTV before. Our news director last year, he started working at Watch Fox, the local Fox affiliate here, when he was a senior as a digital content producer, and every now and then he would be a fill-in anchor. And that was because he got experience through SGTV, through Garnet Media. And even if it's not SGTV, we have, you know, a newspaper, Daily Gamecock. We have a radio station, WSC, magazine, Garnet and Black. So there's so many ways that students can get involved and build up writing experience, editing, photography, videography, reporting, etc., going into a career in television news and media that you aren't told about a lot in the journalism school. As much as I like the J school, if people there told you about these things that you could do to build yourself up, the better off that a lot of students would be. And I just wish that, you know, other students could have those kinds of opportunities, because my entire college experience and everything I've been able to do is because of that, and because of the people there that took a chance on me. So the journalism school here is great when you get into upper division and you actually start learning what you need to know. But if it had combined all of those classes that I took beforehand that I hardly remember anything, from into my like first year, and then maybe took 3 years to do upper division work and, just reps and reps and more reps, then that would be even better stepping into a career in TV news. But student media is extremely important. I can't really stress that enough. And getting involved in it could be the difference between you landing a job in a bigger market or starting in a smaller market and not knowing nearly as much,
Right. When did you realize that you weren't getting all the things done that you wanted to get done when you first got to USC? And then what was it like taking that first step to, okay, I need to join SGTV because I want to start taking steps toward having a productive career in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I knew that I wanted to join SGTV the moment that I got on campus. And that was because when I did orientation, I had talked to somebody who was a reporter there, and he had told me about it, who was actually that news director I was talking about. So kind of funny. But when I had my first semester, I told myself, I'm just going to take this semester to settle into the whole college thing and figure out how hard the classes are, and not involve myself a ton. Because when I was a senior in high school, I was leading the broadcast journalism program at Wando, which is where I went to high school. I was the news director of their TV newscast. And so that took a lot of time from my social life, and I knew that I wanted to try to come into my own first. And I think it was, in that first class when I was sitting there and I was thinking about all of the work I'd done in high school, and then they were telling me some very basic philosophical things about how media operates in society. And I was just like, I don't need any of this. This isn't teaching me how to become a better writer. This isn't teaching me how to, edit stories or go out and find them, rather, that could be an entire class on its own, finding story pitches and finding story ideas. But when I joined SGTV, that amplified that even more, because I was getting to go out and do stories as a freshman. I was getting to produce shows as a freshman. And I was still in those introductory classes. And I was just like, these aren't, like, as much as I, like these professors, I know that I'm not going to keep any of this with me. And that's stood the test of time, because I really haven't. And if I had, gone without those classes, I don't think I would be much different. I think the law class might be the one thing that I could actually take a little bit away from. But still, those are the kinds of things they can combine for you into one class. And then that would be so much more useful, because if you break up those hands-on classes into multiple ones, like maybe have one for photography, one for writing, one for story pitches, and then so on and so forth, then that could just really turn these students into much more well-rounded journalists whenever they're leaving the undergrad program. So I think it was as soon as I joined SGTV that I realized I wasn't really taking much away from these classes, and that I could have done without them and stuck to SGTV. And that was giving me all of the experience and teaching that I needed. The people that were there that were above me at the time, that were passing on their knowledge to me, that was honestly more valuable than the classes I was taking initially, which I hate to say, but it's true. And I remember more from them than I do from those classes, up until now, where I'm actually getting hands-on experience in my classes. But most of it's just reps. And if more people did more reps when they were an undergrad, I think it would serve them really well in their careers.
You also took the initiative of starting the In the Loop podcast at USC. So can you tell me a bit about your motivation for starting that podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So at that time, I had become the program director of SGTV. So I was kind of second in command, leading the station a little bit, but really I had cultivated a live nightly newscast into our programming, and that had never been done before. I kind of called it like my little Avengers initiative. I'm a big Marvel nerd, so it was like bringing everybody together for something more, kind of like a Nick Fury thing. But it was bringing together, our news programs, sports and entertainment, and weather, all to become something like you would see on a local newscast, like kind of where I work now. And I had really just tried to model it off of that. And so after I did that took up a whole semester's worth, and we just kept working at it. And then in the summer, I didn't want to go without any content at all, because all the students were going home and people just want to enjoy their summer. So I said, well, okay, we can still have a newscast. We don't have to have it all the time. We don't have to have it live and nightly, but we can do something remote once a week, where a few people that really want to contribute to it, they can. And they did. The people that I brought onto that staff, they really pulled through. But the inspiration for that podcast came from my love for NPR. I listen to NPR all the time. Pretty much whenever I hop in the car and I'm headed to class, I'm listening to NPR just to catch up on the news of the day. But also they, really mine into really cool topics that I really enjoy listening to. And radio and audio is just as important as video is, and that's kind of something that helped to teach me. But really, it was just to have a program that we could do over the summer so that we wouldn't go without content. And it was really cool kind of looking at the structure of NPR's Up First, which is really kind of what I based my show around, In the Loop, off of how they structured that newscast. I said, well, I want to do that, but on a smaller, more local scale to Columbia for SGTV. And it was honestly a lot of fun. It was just something that we recorded once a week. Each of us found some stories to write and some audio to go with it, so that it wasn't just us talking. And I thought that it went really well. We were able to interview some people for them. Like for the very first one, we interviewed somebody that had put some graffiti up in a arts tunnel that was painted over by the university, and they hadn't told anybody before that wasn't allowed. And everybody was always, advertised to them that this was the art tunnel. As students, you can paint on it. And one of the students that had been drawing on it and had actually kind of broke the news that it had been painted over, I was able to talk to her. And that was a really cool thing that we could integrate into that a little bit. So it was finding a new creative way to do the same things we were doing for the live TV newscast, but for audio and for radio. And it was just a lot of fun to do, and we ended up winning an award for it. So that was kind of cool. I wasn't making it to win an award, really. I was just making it to have content, but I mean, that was something really cool to come of it, which was honestly pretty shocking, because before then I had never won many awards for my work. But we got a Pinnacle Award from the Associated College Press for that, which is kind of the highest honor they can give to a college media organization for something that they do. So that was really humbling, and that was really awesome. But it wasn't, just me that had done that. It was an entire team of people that I had brought together to make that happen every week, and they really pulled through. But it was a lot of fun. It was awesome.
A group that you assembled. I love Marvel too. Love to hear that. You already brought up how, thanks to SGTV, you had the opportunity to intern at Seacrest Studios as a production intern, and it seemed like it was such an invaluable experience for you. What was it that made your time there so meaningful?
Oh, if I were to get into all of that, I feel like I would be talking to you for an hour. So I'll try to dumb it down as much as possible. Seacrest Studios gave me the best summer I have ever had in my life. I was living in Charlotte over the summer. That's where that particular branch of it was located, at Atrium Health Hospital in Charlotte, Levine Children's Hospital. It's under the Ryan Seacrest Foundation, and they have, I think, 17 different stations across the country in various children's hospitals. But what was so meaningful to me was that I was able to incorporate real TV news experience and programming experience with impacting these kids' lives at the hospital every single day. I did a show called Fantastic Fridays, and it was a Marvel show. So I would break down one of the Marvel movies. I talk about the characters, the music, the action, and how they originated from the comics and how they diverged a little bit with the movie storyline. And I just told it to kids, and that's because I love Marvel. So I was able to incorporate my little love for that into something that I could share with people, so I could teach them something, and I could just give myself to this thing and really put my personality into it, and give these kids something that they could really enjoy, because a lot of these kids, they were in really, really awful conditions, from cancer to a lot of other things. It was just really incredible to be able to do this show, walk around the hospital, see kids that were like, "You're DJ Fantastic, I watched your show this morning," and just talk to them, be like, "Oh my God, yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, it made my day really good." And I just can't stress enough how great it felt to be able to be making a direct impact that I could tangibly see on these patients, and going up to them, talking to them, seeing them come down to the studio and interact with us. It was just awesome to do that. And it was an unpaid internship, but I always joke that I think it would be criminal if I got paid for having so much fun. And that's something that I will also never forget. And my bosses, Meredith and Hunter, they were absolutely incredible. They really were just there for us to have our back, both in teaching us how to put on the shows, but also helping us with branding ourselves and for our career. And they connected us to professionals in the area. We even went to the iHeart Media hub in Charlotte and talked to some people that had worked there. So that was awesome. But just being able to see the impact that we were making on these kids, and seeing that we can make their days better just by talking for an hour into a microphone, I mean, that was awesome. And I would do that for the rest of my life if I could, but unfortunately, I probably won't, because I want to go into TV news. But I will always keep that with me. It was incredible.
That was very powerful. That was very powerful indeed. Are there any future projects coming from you that our listeners should know about?
Honestly, I am just going to be continuing my reporting this semester. I have some more stories I'm going to be doing over the next few weeks. And then next semester, I'm going into my senior semester at the J School. So I'll be a reporter for Carolina News, which is their capstone experience, producing 2 newscasts every single day. So I'll be producing newscasts for them. I'll be, putting out stories pretty much every single day for them. And aside from that, I'll just be here, WLTX, producing newscasts. So if you want to see what I'm up to, just tune into our nightly newscasts, and yeah, you'll see a little piece of me there. But everything that I do, I put up on my social media, on my Instagram, my Twitter, my LinkedIn, my Facebook. So if anybody wants to keep up with me, both journalistically and just me talking about silly stuff, then they can go there and check me out.
You can find Finn once again on Instagram at Finn Carlin, and on Twitter at Finn_Carlin for all the content he just discussed. That's all for episode 5 of Media Conversations with Malik Cooper. And to stay up to date with future interviews and content, subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. I've got some exciting projects of my own planned too, so don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Malik Cooper Media, and on Twitter at Malik_Cooper. Thank you all for listening. I can't wait to be back on episode 6. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave our audience with?
This podcast that you're doing is awesome. Kudos to you for branching out and doing something on your own. Not a lot of people do it. So I definitely have a lot of respect, and just thank you for thinking of me. I mean, this was awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that all of your future media conversations go just as well, if not better, as this one did. So you've been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Finn Carlin, everyone. And once again, can't wait to be back for episode 6. See you then.